Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. My name is Kevin and I'm the Technical Community Manager here at Postman. I'm joining us here today from still very cold New York. Feel free to let us know where you're from in the chat and say hi. We can address your comments and stuff on the stream, but today I'm joined by Gbadebo here. How's it going, Gbadebo?
Hi everyone, I'm Gbadebo. I'm a developer relations engineer at Postman, and it's exciting to be here with everyone today.
Yeah, Gbadebo, you've been on a couple streams with us before. I think the last one I did, we were together too as well. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about the Postman Collection Format. Before we get into that, we've got a whole in case you missed it section. Let's make sure I'm sharing my screen, and I'm going to nudge the comments off to the side for now. But yeah, so in case you missed it, we had a release in March 10.12. There's a bunch of new stuff here. Gbadebo, if you could share this link, that'll be super helpful. You can now share specific collections with view-only access to quickly collaborate with people in your organization. There's a bunch of new stuff, including like documentation for your APIs with GraphQL, gRPC, WebSocket requests, and collections. You can sort your variables in collections, environments, and globals. A bunch of different stuff here. Next is the Postman blog at blog.postman.com. We have 3 new posts that had come out in the last, I think, week now, right? Hold on, I need to really sneeze. How do I turn off my camera? Hold on. Okay, I survived. Yeah, so most notably is the Postman Live collections for automated documentation. So this feature will automatically update your collections in Postman, which is pretty neat. We also additionally have a bunch of new videos on the Postman YouTube channel. Hold on. Sneeze. These allergies, sorry. Yeah, so there's been a bunch of new videos that came out in the last week, so you can scroll through here and see some of the new stuff. We have something even from Gbadebo here. Additionally, we also have Postman Intergalactic, which is our webinars. So we have one coming out next week, building low-code applications with Postman flows. and then also 2 more coming in April. These are all very beginner level. They're about an hour long, and it's a great way to get started with Postman. And then additionally, there's also some events coming up. So you can go to postman.com/events and see different live streams, meetups, webinars. I think this is even this stream. So this is the perfect place to keep up with what's going on with Postman. Um, and then, yeah, I think from there we can get started. So what are we talking about today, Debo?
Yeah, today we're talking about collections in Postman. But more specifically, we're talking about the collection format,
Right.
which is a
So
JSON representation for collections in Postman.
Right. So I've been working with collections for about a year now with Postman, and even on our last stream, I learned that collections, they're represented in code as JSON, and you can use that code, that format, to generate documentation. You can do a bunch of different stuff with that JSON.
Mhm.
But that stream was 2 3 months ago. It was a while ago, and I assume a lot has changed since then. Can you go into details about some of that?
Yeah, what has changed is now we now have a place where you can learn about that JSON that forms the basis of collections. So we now have like a new documentation for the collection format. It's a documentation that just sort of explain the different parts of the format, what it does, the value it provides, and uh, if you just want an overview of what the format does and its basic structure, there's a section for that. But if you want more in-depth knowledge about how each unit of a collection work and how everything ties back to each other, you can learn
Right.
about that in the documentation as well.
Yeah, so let's actually share that really quick.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move these comments because you had a blog post go out about a week ago, 10 days ago, about the
Yeah.
documentation for this format coming out. Because before, I don't believe there was very much documentation at all, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There wasn't a documentation for it at all. The one that existed was auto-generated from the schema of the format itself.
Right. Yeah, this is much fancier. So you can see from the Learning Center how to get to this page, and
Mhm.
whole documentation page here as well. Um, so how should we get started here?
Yeah, so I think the first thing we need to get started with is talk about what the collection format is,
Right.
and before actually like getting into like the structure of the collection format and just really going over how the format itself translates to collections that we interact with on Postman.
Sorry, sneezing. Um, yeah, okay. So do you want to share your screen? We could swap
Yeah,
over.
yeah, I can share my screen.
All right. So yeah, for the audience, we can still see your comments and ask us any of your questions. I can bring them up on screen. Feel free to pause us at any time. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm currently on Postman and I have like this collection called sample, and this collection has just one request. I didn't bother to change the name of this request. But yeah, we'll see that this collection here, we have this base URL and we're using the Postman Echo service here. And we have the option of exporting this collection as JSON. So I could click export. And once I export this collection, it downloads it. Then I could open this exported JSON here. And I can see that all the information that I had in my collection here is also all the information I have in this JSON. This is the name of my request. It's a post request, so I can see that it has a request method of post. This is the URL structure. So basically, this JSON is the same thing as what we have here, which is essentially what the collection format is. It's a JSON representation of collections in Postman.
Real quick, could back on the JSON file, could you zoom in a little bit? It was a little tricky to see. Um, Perfect. So yeah, I can see the Postman ID, which I assume is the unique ID for the collection, right?
Yes, yes, that's the
Okay.
unique ID for this collection.
So
And you
that
can see the name of the collection.
right. And that's the schema that we had exported it as. And then I'm
Yes,
assuming I see items here. That's an array of different objects. And that looks
yes,
like the request that you created, new requests with the method
yes,
post header.
yes,
So I'm
yes.
assuming in that header section, that's like the header in the actual request that you can define in Postman, you can do in code here as well.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah. So the way I like to see collections are like they tell you how what you need to successfully run an API request, right? Which is essentially what the format as well does. It gives you all the information you need to successfully make an API request or work with a workflow. Let's say you want to test a login workflow, for example, where someone provides
Right.
their username or password, you're sending it to a server, getting an authorization token and verifying the authorization token. You could test the workflow with collections in Postman. And what really aids all of this functionality is this JSON right here. And what we want to talk about today is the different units of this JSON and how that translates back to what we see on the UI here.
Gotcha. So it seems like it's another way to interface with, say, like our collection in a programmatically in a way with code um, without going through
Yeah,
like the Postman UI.
yeah, without going through the Postman UI. Yeah, I like to
Okay.
see the Postman UI as a front end to this JSON here. You don't
Okay.
have to care about all the little tiny details. The Postman UI completely abstract all of these details for you.
Right.
Uh,
That makes a lot of sense that it's like a front end. And from what I remember in our the stream that we had done together with collection converters is that we were creating a collection using, say, OpenAPI,
mhm.
exporting that, and then converting that JSON and importing it in another format. So
Yeah,
that's at least what I'm familiar with, but I'm assuming a lot has changed since then.
yeah. I mean, collections and OpenAPI, I'd like to say they complement each other,
Right.
because an OpenAPI is, I'd say, server-side definition. It tells you these are the different endpoints, these are the interfaces this API exposes, and this serves as an API contract between the producer of the API and the people consuming the API. While collections are majorly client-side, they tell you this API has been created, but here are the different things you need to successfully run this API. So it just contains all of those different information. So you can now create a collection and put all of this information in that collection and share it with people you're working together on that API with. And without having to do anything extra, they can just come to your collection in Postman and click send and be able to easily test your APIs because it contains everything you need to successfully run that API.
Gotcha. Okay. Um yeah, and
So
we have oh, go ahead.
yeah, I wanted to mention that I think we have a couple of questions in the comments.
Yes, we're the same brain cell. So one question I saw is, do we support mobile testing?
Uh, well, I'd say that question is a bit unclear. I'm not sure um is what the person is trying to refer to
Right.
by mobile testing.
Yeah, we
Perhaps the
can't
person
really
could clarify.
yeah, we can't really see your name, but if you're still here, give us a little bit more information to work with. Or do you mean using Postman on mobile or being able to do some of this stuff on mobile?
Mhm.
Another question was generating in Swagger because I understand there's a lot of different languages and
Yeah,
specifications that we can generate in.
yeah. So Swagger is OpenAPI 2.0, and there's a newer version of Swagger now, which is OpenAPI 3.x. So yes, collections are highly interoperable, and you can generate other API specifications from this JSON here. So it's part of some of the examples that we are going to be showing today. How you can take this JSON that you export in Postman and convert it to the OpenAPI definition, or you can take an OpenAPI definition and convert it into a collection.
Right. And I
So
believe there's ways to also add new support. as like contributors, not part of Postman, to convert into different languages and formats as well, correct? Because I believe there's
Yeah, yeah,
something Kevin had as well.
yeah, that's correct. Where you can generate code from like this JSON, or you can generate code snippets or SDKs for your different programming languages that you work with.
Gotcha. And it looks like we have a little bit of extra clarification on that mobile testing question. For example, like simulating mobile tests, which I'm assuming you mean like the mock service feature where you can simulate API requests or something.
Well, if it's about mocking, I mean, a lot of the functionality that we see in Postman, like monitoring, um, writing tests, are aided by like the collection format itself. So you can create mock servers from this collection definition.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But simulating mobile tests, I would say that's still a bit unclear and would need more clarification with that.
Gotcha. Okay, well it looks like we hopefully answered your question. Um but yeah, I guess we can move on. I think we've mostly caught up.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll do here is just introduce people to the structure of a collection. And I'm going to be using the documentation here as a guide, because this documentation is a good resource for anyone who is looking at how to learn about what a collection is, what the basic structure is, how can we work with it. The documentation is still work in progress because there's still a lot of other contents coming to the documentation. But what we have now explains what a collection is and how you can work with it. So there's this section of the documentation that reads structure of a collection. And here we have like this really um this diagram here that just shows you sort of like a JSON tree of what the collection is. And you see that here at this node here, we have the collection and we have three object nodes here. We have the info object here. So you can think of each node here as an object. We
Right.
have the info object here, we have the item object here, and we have the item group object here. And this directly relates to like everything we have in collections in Postman here. And I'm going to explain that the info object here just contains metadata about your collection. For example, if I go to this JSON here, I'll see that I have this info object
Info.
and I have this item object here. But you
Okay.
see that here, info contains the name of my collection, and it also contains the ID of my collection. So it just contains metadata information about my collection.
Right.
Um,
So
the
things like
item
the
of
title, the
yeah,
description, that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
and the
Okay.
description, that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Neat.
yeah. So the item here is a container for a single request in your collection. So this here is a request. You can think of it as a request item, but a request is just one of the things that a request has other things associated to it, right? For example, if I run this request, I I'm waiting for the response. Not sure why this is taking so long.
It sounds like your UPS kicked in earlier. I heard that beep or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that would have been great timing.
yeah. Yeah, so I ran this request and I have this response. I can save this response as an example
Right.
in Postman, and I have like this response that I've saved as an example to this request here. Um, that is exactly what the response is here. If you look at the
Okay.
collection here, I could save one response and rename this to, let's say, this is 200 OK, just to show that this is what a 200 OK response is. And
That's
if
what
I
that
run
would
this
look
request,
like.
yeah, and if I run this request again, I could set another example and name this. Let's assume it was given a 404 error. I could name this 404 error. So I'm saving different examples of the different kind of responses that we gotten from this single request, which is what the response object does. It just contains a reference to this original request and the different responses that we can get from it. And now there's also the
Gotcha.
concept, yeah. There's also the event object here. There's the concept of events, and events here are just, well, they're just test and pull request scripts. So we have two types of events. There's the pull request event and there's a test event.
Okay.
So the way you come here and author pull request scripts that run before the API request, and then test scripts that are after the API request. This is how they're represented in the format. They're represented as something called events.
Makes
Um,
sense.
then there's the item group. So actions in Postman, we have this feature that allows us to create folders. So I could add a folder. I could name this. I could name this folder authentication, and here I can have things like login and whatnot, and other similar requests.
Right.
So here I'm grouping similar API requests together inside folders, and that's exactly what this item group does. It's a folder. And because it is a folder, means it can contain other folders or item groups, or it can contain other requests or items. So this is the basic structure of the collection format, right? It's just you having an item or having a folder and then nesting other folders or items inside that folder. And then you, in your item, you specifying your request and information related to that request, and you specifying different responses for that request and event.
Okay. And you mentioned those were just two events, was the pre-request script and the test script or the post request script.
Yeah.
Are there anything else there notable that we could use in the collection format?
Uh, Anything notable like what?
Like, are those the only two events that kind of exist there, or are there other ones that we can work with? Or
Yeah, those are like the two events that exist in the format. And the interesting
right.
thing is in Postman, you can have just one per request script and you can have just one test script. But in the format, you can have multiple per request script and you can have multiple test script and sort of
Oh,
define which of those per request scripts is active and which of those test scripts should be active.
so you could switch, say, depending on the environment you're in. If you're in, say, production, you'll run a whole different test script or something
Yeah, you
different
run
like
a
that,
different,
right?
exactly,
That's
exactly.
awesome. We
Yeah,
need
so
that
you
in
could do
base
that.
Postman.
Yeah.
That's cool. Um, really
Yeah.
quickly, we had a pretty good question, somewhat related. Postman is just for running the API, or is it also used to build APIs? Postman is a platform for all of that, for building your APIs, but also testing them, for designing them, documenting them. You can discover APIs even from the Postman public API network. You can search whatever tool you're trying to work with. We've got a ton of content to learn this stuff on our YouTube channel. Actually, next week, or sorry, in April, we have a really excellent webinar coming up that helps you get started with that stuff. We'll share a link to that at the end. But great question.
Yeah, that was a good question.
Yeah, and this other person, Rod, had mentioned that you can use test scripts to set variables. So that's another really excellent use case for getting,
Yeah,
say,
for
data
test
in a
script.
request and then storing it in a variable.
Yeah. So one really good thing about like the collection format is it just does not allow you to define what is needed to successfully run a collection. It allows you to model API workflows, which is why it provides all of this extra functionality, like you being able to set and modify variables within your test of a request script, you being able to author JavaScript and do stuff and do stuff or perform specific action on the response you're getting back from your API, like writing assertions and tests and whatnot. So it allows you to model an API workflow end to end.
Right. Okay. Um, we had a question as well. If it's possible to transfer collections to and from JMeter. believe we can do. That was a question I've answered
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with JMeter. I think it's just for performance testing and stuff. But I know that there is a collection I know there's a collection on Postman that I could share that allows you convert a collection to JMeter and JMeter to collections. I mean, I could put that in the chat when I do find it. So I'm not going
Yeah,
to.
and if there's any questions that we're not able to really, because we're kind of short on time overall, but if there's any questions that we miss or you think of questions later, let us know on the Postman community forums. I'll drop a link there as well. We have sections that you can ask whatever questions you have, and there's always people around to help you out. But yeah, thanks. That's a great question.
Yeah, so I just put a link in the chat to a collection that converts Postman collections to JMeter. The link is in the chat.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Moving on from here, we can see that this diagram that I have represented here can be translated into a JSON here. Although we do not have a folder here, we just have info and an empty item object.
Right,
But then taking a look at the item object again, we can see that the item object contains a request and a response like we saw in that diagram, and some metadata information like the name of the item, the description, the ID. Uh, then we have like the same thing for item groups, which can contain an array of items. So this is like a folder that can contain an array of requests, essentially.
gotcha.
Um, then we would see the structure of a request, which is also similar, right? We have the description of that request, we have the URL, we have the request method, and a request can have things like request headers. So the request headers are an array because there can be more than one request header in a request. It's the same way if I come to a request here and I'm specifying an header, there's more than one request header. So that's just an object here to specify multiple request header. Then there's also the request body here, which I'm not going to be speaking a lot about now. But then the collection supports multiple different kinds of request body. I mean, coming to the request body here, we can see that you can specify form data, you can specify X, this URL encoded data, and you can specify raw data and select if you want it to be text, JSON, JavaScript, or HTML. You can also
Hmm.
send binary files, or it could be GraphQL. So all of these are supported by the collection format JSON. But yeah, I'll just go straight to this part of the documentation that talks about what's the basic structure of an API looks in a collection. And you find that that is very similar to what we exported here. So this here is what I like to consider the most basic form of a collection. I mean, if I take this JSON here and I import it into Postman, it's going to from a collection with this that I can like I'd have something like this that I can interface with Postman. And we can see that this is just that's just a simple info block that has just a name, and the item here has just a name and a request. And the request here is just a URL. So when the request here is just a URL, the request method defaults to the get request type. The get
Right.
request method, yeah, yeah. And
Um.
here we have,
Oh, go ahead. I have a question
yeah,
for after.
okay, yeah. And here we have something that shows here because it's an array, it's an item group. So it means this would be considered as like a collection that has like multiple requests. And then we could see here where we are nesting folders inside folders. It becomes a bit more complex here, but it's still
Right.
we just piecing together all of this different information that I've talked about from the start. You can see that this is still a basic item. It has just one request URL, the description and a name. And we can see that it is in an array of items, which means it's a folder. And we can see that here, this is one request. This is another request, and this is just a request that is not inside a folder. So
Okay.
this here just forms like the basis of all of the collections that we interact with in Postman.
Right. Um. I thought of something back with the structure of a collection. We were talking about headers. Postman provides a lot of pre-filled headers, and I noticed that those weren't filled out in the collection JSON that we had exported. I'm assuming
Yeah,
that in that case, that Postman's still assuming those default values.
yes.
Okay.
So in the header section here, if you come to this info here, um, these headers are like it has like this info text that says this header was automatically added. The content type header is it reads the content type header is added to help the server identify media type and request. Use the request body tab. So this is like our headers that Postman automatically added before making our request.
Right.
There aren't headers that we altered ourselves. So if I was to come here and add, let's say, a request header like X auth API, let's say I want to add an API key, for example, and I have like a random API key or something, and I export this collection, you'd see that I'll find this request header in the exported collection, but I wouldn't find any of these automatically added headers at the top in my collection
Right.
because Postman automatically added them for me and they were not headers that I authored myself.
Okay. So then, from my understanding, also, if I want to override, say, the user agent, I just add that exact thing into Postman's UI here. But if I do that in the exported JSON, that would also override the default in Postman, then, correct?
Well, I'm not sure, but let's try that and see because I haven't
Okay.
tried that myself before. But
I'm
let's
assuming that's
try.
how it would work.
Yeah, I'm guessing it should override. Yeah, it does override. This is a
Right.
duplicate header. I will be overriding by the user header. Yeah, yeah, that's how it works.
So if we're doing that in the code, then that would, or in the JSON, that would still have that same functionality. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Cool. Thanks for
yeah,
answering
cool.
that.
Yeah, yeah. So what we want to do now is just to go over this documentation and see if we can build a collection in JSON rather than building it from the Postman UI. Just by going over the documentation itself and copying and pasting code. So I have my VS Code open. I'm just going to delete all of this. I have my VS Code open here, and I have this file called collection.json.
Right.
I have a bunch of other files here that I would probably be using for a couple of other demos that I will be showing today. But here, since a collection is basically just JSON, it means I can start with just creating an object here. And I mentioned that there are three basic objects in a collection. There's the info object,
So we're
info,
building this collection totally from a blank slate now.
yeah, totally from a blank slate. And I did
Okay.
mention that there's an item and the info here, uh, we said contains some metadata information like the
Right.
name,
I remember an ID, that
uh,
name.
yeah, description. I just gave it some random name. Uh, so this is a collection of that from scratch. One important thing here is we have to note that this schema is an important parameter that we must always provide. If you look at any exported collection, you'd notice that we have this schema here. And this schema is just the raw JSON schema for this collection. You don't have to understand what this, you don't have to be able to read this. This is just the raw JSON schema that
Right.
defines every aspect of that collection. Yeah. So we also have to like provide this schema objects, this schema here. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. Here. So for the item here, because I want to have more than one request, I could make it an array and input an item contains requests, right? And a request should have a name. So the first thing I'll do is I'll probably name this request one and give it a URL. I could use the Postman Echo service as well, or I could just say, okay, this should go to google.com. Now I could copy and paste this simple request here and paste it here, and I could say request two. They should navigate to postman.com. Then I click save. So one thing I want to do now is I want to import this collection. And this here is a collection that we just built, right? It's a very simple collection. It's a very simple collection, but we can import the same collection back into Postman and we'll be able to interact with it in the Postman UI. So if I come back here now and I click on this import and let me open that file on my other screen and just drag and drop it here. So I'm just going to drag and drop that file here. And you can see that it's able to infer the name of the collection, that this is the Scratch collection.
Right.
And if I click import, you can see that that collection has been imported and I have two requests. One is this request one. The URL is missing. The URL is also missing here. I'm not sure what went wrong, but we could
might
go over
need
the
it might be the request type, like get, post, push. I don't believe that was defined. We may need that.
Yes. So I made a mistake somewhere. If you notice, I specified URL here. I specified URL here. But an item ideally should contain a request and not a URL. The request is what should contain the URL. So this is why,
Right.
like, this documentation is a good reference. This is what an item looks like. Right? I specified this as a URL of specifying it as a request. So if I update this now to request, and I update this now to request, and I save, and I come back here, let me delete this collection. Then let me drag and drop that collection back. Import. Then I import that collection back. And you'd see that now, oh, it's still the same. That's interesting.
What if
How did it?
what if you just write something there, like a fill out a URL, save it, export it, and then we can compare and see if there's something different.
I should fill out the URL. Okay.
Yeah, like
Okay.
in
Yeah.
Postman, we'll see what we're missing.
Yeah. Okay. So let me see if this. Then I
We had a
export this.
question about where to go? How to specify the JSON request body example in Postman Collections. This is another great way to see how to do that. If you fill that
Yeah.
information out in the Postman body and then export it, you'll see what that looks like and how you can do it from scratch as well.
So here it is
Could you
specifying the
zoom in a
request
little
method.
bit?
Yeah.
Awesome, thank
Okay.
you.
So
Sorry,
yeah,
I
it
don't
is
mean to
specifying.
interrupt.
Yeah. So yeah, it is specifying the request method and the URL. But if we use it as a string, I expect it to work as well. Because but then if instead of using a string, I use a full, because if I use it as a string, you're supposed to assume that the request method is a get request method.
Right.
and just make use of that. But it seems it's not doing that. Let's see the documentation for a request. Here it talks about, there's a section here that talks about the structure of a request. And this here, description, the request method. I'm just going to leave the request header empty. Then specify a URL for this request. Let's see if this would work. So I expect this to work now. I'm just going to delete this. So now I have
Crossing
one single
fingers.
request. Yeah, fingers crossed. Drum rolls.
Here we go. Does it work?
I'll delete this one. Then yes, it worked.
Third time's a charm.
Yeah. Yeah, but I was not sure why it wasn't working when I used the URL. I've tried that multiple times before, and it did
It was
work. And
intentional.
assume
We were
that
just showing people how to demo and debug.
yeah,
Plan.
yeah, yeah, totally planned. So yeah, back to the question the person was asking. Assuming this was a post request, it means it is going to require a request body, right? And you can see that here we have a request body here, and the request body has a mode parameter, and the different parameters that you pass to that object depends on what the mode of that request is. So if I come to the top here and I navigate to the request body section, you can see that we have 5 different request body modes. We have the raw, URL encoded, form data file, and GraphQL. But we'll be dealing with just the raw now. So I'm going
Right.
to set the request. Yeah. So I'm going to specify body here, and specify a mode of raw. And because the mode is raw, it means I have to have an object that has a property of raw. You should know that if the mode here was URL encoded, I would need to have an object of URL encoded here. So the mode I specify sort of determines the property, the object property that follows. So because I have raw here, I could provide a raw string. I could provide raw JSON, but the mode of raw here can contain anything. It can contain a serialized JSON, can contain XML, HTML, or just plain text.
Right. So you could do all of that
So
anyway.
yeah, you could do all of that. So here I'm just going to provide a plain string. This is a string, and I'm going to save. Then let me just delete this collection again and import it. Import the new one. Sorry, I have to click import first.
This would
Then
be a
click
great
import.
example of being able to live update a collection.
Yeah. So it's not selecting it as raw. Let's see what the documentation says. Or let me just copy and paste an example directly from this documentation, because of our time. This one here is URL encoded, and I can copy and paste this one rather than writing from scratch. So I can just copy and paste this one and edit it to whatever I want. But I'm going to save. And if it doesn't work, we're going to do exactly the same thing. Export a collection in
Yeah.
Postman, and yeah.
Reverse engineering it.
Yeah, we're reverse engineering it. So I'll click import body. It's still specified as none. Let me export this and see.
So while we're doing that, oh, go ahead. Actually, we'll answer the question after.
Okay. So request, this is the method of post. This is the body, the mode raw. But this was what I did previously, right? I had a mode of raw and I had raw as a text, which is interesting because this was exactly what
It's
I had
exactly what we
before.
have.
Yeah,
um,
but importing it back.
hmm. While you think
Well,
about that, I will answer this question then. Someone had asked, why would you need to create the collection outside of Postman and then import it into Postman if Postman's already providing an easy UI to do that? It's a great question. This isn't something that
that's a
everyone would
very,
need to do. You can answer. You know
yeah,
much better than I do.
that's a very good question. So there are different use cases for a collection, and Postman already provide and covers a lot of those different use cases. But there are things you'd want to do with a collection outside of Postman. For example, there's this tool that I came across recently. It's called Graphman, the GraphQL security tool, and they allow you to do a lot of GraphQL security analysis on their platform. So when they're done with like the security analysis, they provide you a Postman collection that you can then download and import into Postman to run all of those analyses easily. And that's like a very useful feature because one, they first have to like create a tool that is able to generate a Postman collection JSON, and for them to have to like create a tool that has the ability to generate this collection JSON here, it means they first have to understand the structure of a collection and how the collection JSON itself works outside of the Postman environment. So this is very useful when you're trying to build specific tools to solve specific problems that isn't covered on Postman. So there's one other tool that will probably be demoing today. It allows you to generate a documentation in Markdown from a collection, and you're able to have that documentation in Markdown. There are also cases whereby you are working with other API specification and you need to convert from those API specifications to collections so you can work with those requests in Postman. So let's say, for example, you're working with an OpenAPI definition. There are tools that allow you convert an OpenAPI definition into the collection format and import that collection directly into Postman. Although in Postman, we do have the the API builder that allows you to work with OpenAPI definitions and other kind of API definitions. And you can also generate a collection directly from those different tools. But if you want to do it outside of the Postman environment, perhaps you're building tools to support collections, it's always a good idea for you to understand this format here and how it works.
Right. Yeah, and that's something we're hoping to cover also in this stream as to why you would want to do this.
That's why
One
you'd want to do
suggestion
this here.
from LinkedIn user is the body is outside of the request block.
Yes, that's a very good observation because I was thinking we had exactly the same thing, but the body has to be within the request. And that was
Right.
just a mistake I made.
It
So if we try
happens.
it now,
It's
yeah.
the nature of coding, misplaced comma or bracket and everything breaks.
Yeah, and that's like the beauty of what we are doing. We are not just walking over it, but people in the audience are also teaching us and pointing out our mistakes. And
We're quizzing
yeah,
you, making sure you're paying attention.
yeah, thumbs up to whoever that was.
Good extra points.
Yeah, extra point. Yeah, so let me import this now. Body. Okay, now it works.
It's there.
Yeah, it's there.
Lesson
So
learned.
yeah, if this was JSON, for example, I have, let's say, although this has to be serialized JSON, so I don't know if it would work.
Gonna see
But
if
I
we
could use
can
my
first
name.
try.
Let's see if we can get this on the first try. Import this.
Here we
Did it
go.
work? Yeah, it worked.
Ooh. So this is still showing as raw text, but we can change
Yeah,
that
as
in the
raw
JSON
text.
as well. We could
Yeah, we can
select
change.
JSON.
Yeah, if I was to provide like a serialized JSON, because I used single quotes instead of double quotes, that's one.
Right?
Uh,
But that
it
could be
should work,
fixed if we
but
like back check them, I believe, right?
yeah, and we could click beautify here, and Postman just automatically formats that for us. But I'm not going to spend time doing that.
Yeah,
So
we're
back, yeah, yeah. So back to like that question on why would you want to author a collection from scratch? In most cases, you'd never need to do this yourself, except you're trying to build a tool that extends the functionality of Postman, or that extends the functionality of collections that is not yet covered on Postman, or you're working in your development environment and you need to, let's say, one of that very good advantage of collection format here is that you can take this JSON here and run it in any environment of your choice. So we have this open source tool called Newman that allows you to run a collection on the CLI and both as a library within your code base. So you can take this JSON here, perhaps make modification to it before you run it, depending on your specific use case, or you can just use it in your continuous integration pipeline and write a bunch of pull request and test scripts, have your collection here exported, and you always like run it on the CI in any environment you want using Newman.
you had an
But yeah,
also
would show some example of this.
you had a
Yeah, go
great
ahead,
example
Kevin.
as well where you can also have multiple pre-request and test scripts defined in the collection format, whereas in Postman you can only have the one.
Yeah. That's another great use case. So based on specific environments, you might want to have one per request script set as active and another one set as disabled. The format allows that. Let me show that. I think I have that in events here. So if you come to like this is an event and it has like this listen property that can either be test or per request, and then you specify the script itself that is provided in this exec. So all the JavaScript code you write within a test or per request script is converted into an array, and the array is splitted by line breaks. So every single line of code in your test or per request script is one entry in this array. And you can see that this is disabled first. This is set to disabled first. But the fact that in an event we can have multiple of this, you the fact that in an event instead of having one of these, you can have multiple events objects. You can have multiple eject objects. If You can have multiple event objects. It means you can set some of them to disabled false and some of them
Right.
to disabled true. And the one that is disabled that is set as disabled false would be the one that Postman will automatically pick and run. It's going to ignore other ones that are set to false.
Right, meaning like enabled. And then with the JavaScript, that's defined in an array, and each line of code is its own block. Is there an easier way to say define that without having to do it line by line like that? Like, can we write that code somewhere and then import it and pass it?
Yeah,
I don't
I
think
know there's
so.
a tool that allows you to work with the JavaScript code in test and pre-request script. It is open source, but I can't quite remember the name of the tool. But I know there's an open source tool for that that allows you to write test and pre-request scripts in VS Code and then
Right.
bundles everything together for you.
I'll
Yeah.
uh, I'll try to
So
find that and add it to the description after this video is published.
yeah. So let's go into like the use cases. Now we have this collection JSON. What are like the different things that we can do with it? and how is that useful to us. So the first one that I'm going to demo is generating markdown documentation, because that's more or less like a very intuitive one. So how do you take this collection here and convert it to markdown? So there's this open source tool that can be used. It was built by, I can't remember his name, but it can be found on this repository, Postman to Markdown. And it takes a Postman collection, it's a CLI tool that takes a Postman collection and helps you generate a Markdown documentation for it. Now, one thing you realize is that within Postman automatically sort of generates a documentation for your API for you.
Right.
I can click this view complete documentation, and I can see that here I can easily infer that this is a post request, the name of the request. I can infer the URL. I can see that the request body is a raw text just by looking at this. And you notice that this collection is almost empty. I do not have a lot of information about this collection. But if you want to see examples of other documentations that are generated using a collection, one that I like to show is the Postman API. Let me open this collection because it has like a really good documentation. So whenever I'm talking about documentation in Postman, I always like to use the Postman API as an example. You'd see that this is an example of the kind of documentation that you can generate using collections. And this is automatic. You automatically have this by default when you work with collections in Postman. So I can view this using the documenter, and you can see that I have this auto-generated documentation for me. Now, all of this overview and information here are stuff that I've added to the description of my requests and my collection. And now you can see that I have code samples and code snippets generated for the different requests. And I can have this done in any language of my choice. This is Node.js, Axios. I can use JavaScript, Fetch. Here you can see that it's no more than Node.js. I can do it in a different language entirely. I can do it in, let me use PHP.
How about like Python?
Yeah,
Been
let me
working with
try
Python a
Python.
lot lately.
Python, yeah.
The HTTP client.
So
Cool.
now you can see that I can copy this particular code and use it anywhere to run this request that I have right here in this documentation. And all of these are auto-generated and bundled together. And the only reason why we are able to provide this in Postman is because of the collection format,
Yeah,
right?
so
So
it's a little hard to see, probably for some people, but to clarify, that's not just JSON code. That's actual, in this case, Python code that you could use to run that whole request.
yes, yes. So I'm going to close this and back to this. So I already have this CLI tool installed, but it can be installed with npm, and it's called Postman to Markdown. And I have this collection too. Here is an example collection that I have. It uses the Postman Echo service, and it's a bit more robust than the sample collection that we just wrote. So I'm going to be generating Markdown for that. And
We'll be
according to the
sharing this
document,
code as well at the end of the stream. So that was a large file. Don't worry, we'll share the repository with you and you can look through that too.
yeah, this file was just a collection that was exported. I didn't write this by hand. But to run this, I'm going to just Postman to Markdown, and then the name of the file that I want to generate a Markdown from. So I'm just going to do Postman to Markdown collection to the JSON, and I'll click enter. Now I can see that there's a collection 2.md markdown here. So I'm just going to copy all of this markdown code and use a tool to preview that markdown. I'll use a tool called Belinja. I
It looks
think
like it's gonna make writing my GitHub
Belinja.io.
readmes so much simpler.
I think I got the spelling wrong.
Just try to add something like after the IO and Google might find it. Perfect.
Yeah,
Even better.
yeah, it found it now. Yeah. So, okay, so this was from when I was testing yesterday. But I'm just going to paste that markdown here, and you can see that I have a markdown documentation here that I can copy and paste and probably GitHub README or something. So if let's say I'm developing this API and I have a collection for it, and I have like descriptions and whatnot in my collection, I can export that collection as JSON, use this tool to generate a markdown documentation for it, and put this in my GitHub README. And then probably somewhere here use something like the run in Postman button. I like to use the run in Postman button a lot because it helps people get started with a collection easily.
Definitely. I'd
You
love to see
can,
people use the button more.
yeah, just via running Postman, and you can use this HTML friendly one or Markdown friendly. And you can just copy this and put it anywhere in your Markdown.
It's
Let me put
great
it at
to
the
add
end.
to your blog posts, to your GitHub README, wherever you're sharing it, and that links right to
Mhm.
your collection to run it.
Yeah, that links right to your collection. So if I click this, it just opens up the collection straight up and tells me to fork it. Then I can fork that collection to my workspace and start working with it right away.
We actually have
Yes.
two questions. Really quick
Okay.
if we have time. Can we
Yeah.
include authorization header information while building collections with JSON? That definitely we can do. We were just covering that. Do you want to very quickly show that?
Yeah, so you can include authorization with JSON while working. The thing is, anything you can do with a collection here can most likely be done in the JSON. In fact, I have this section of documentation that highlights differences between the collection formats and Postman collections. And a couple of the differences, like the auto-generated headers that Kevin mentioned the other time. There's one about using multiple test and pull request scripts that like I mentioned previously, this one. So scripting as arrays, external referencing script. I didn't mention this, but the way we can have the question Kevin asked the other time, where uh, can you work with the test and pull request scripts, let's say in your code editor? The schema does support you using an external reference for scripting. So it has like this SRC attribute where you can have a script on another domain entirely, and you, let's say it's probably on a GitHub repo or something, and you just
Right.
reference it directly from there. So that makes it easy for you to version control those scripts if you're working with it externally. But
Kind of like
yeah,
referencing a CSS file or something like that. As long as it's
yeah.
published somewhere where it can consume like raw JSON from GitHub, that'll pull that
Mhm.
code in and then use it.
Yeah, yeah. But this
Um,
part is always very good to go through to understand what the difference is between collections in Postman and the collection format. But back to the authentication question, if we come to the structure of a request, you notice that we have this authorization part here in the documentation that covers the different authorization scopes that we can make use of. So this is one authorization scope. I'm just going to copy this, and in the requests URL, let me come back to this request JSON. In the body, I'll just specify auth here and
yeah, and if
paste that code that I copied, so I don't have to worry about it too much. So here we are just using a basic authorization, which is basically username and password. But if we were to use, let's say, OAuth 2.0, or an API key, that would definitely work as well. But yeah, we're just using a basic authorization. And if I come here, let me delete this so I can import it.
Yeah, and if there's other things that you're wondering about, like how to do, referring to that documentation is a great place to start. But also, like we had demonstrated, if you're kind of stuck and you're trying to debug something, try to do it in Postman first. You can handle your
Yeah.
authorization there, export it, see how it looks, and then work from there.
Yeah. So always refer to that documentation when you have questions. It's pretty much tries to cover up all the different things that you can do. And one other thing that we're trying to do is to document different toolings. For example, the converting from a collection to, let's say, an open API, or from an open API definition to a collection, or converting from a collection to markdown, like I just demoed, are things that we want to include in this documentation so people can find all this information in one single place. Um, but yeah, you can see that I included some authorization information, and I imported that into Postman, and you can see that it has that information, your unique username, my password. I can view my password here. Yeah, so that works. You can work
Very
with
secure
authorization in just
password.
the JSON. Yeah,
Yeah, great question.
yeah, that was a good question. So the next thing I'm going to show, aside from generating Markdown, is I'm going to show how you can generate code snippets using a. I'm going to be writing a bit of code. So if you come to a request in Postman and you come here to this sidebar and you click on this code part, you'd see that what you can do in the documentation that I demoed the other time, where you can generate um, code snippets for that request in the languages, can also be done here. So this is Node Axios, and I can see that it has generated some JavaScript code here for me. I can change this to that HTTP, and it's generating it in real time, right? I can use Node.js request, and I can see that it's generating a code snippet for me that I can work with. Um, so you can do this with a collection format, and you don't have to, like, one thing that I really love about Postman is that a lot of the different functionalities that you see in Postman, the different tools that enables those functionalities are open source. For example, the collection format itself is open source. It's an open source specification. The Postman runtime is open source. The package that allows us to generate requests and code snippets, that allows us to generate code snippets in multiple languages from a request, is also open source. There are like multiple stuff that Postman provides that are open source. How we're able to convert OpenAPI to collections is open source. Um, I mean, just by going to github.com/postman labs, you'd see all of the different open source stuffs that we have. So a lot of the core features and functionalities that you see in Postman, some of them have the libraries that are used to um, work with those implementation open sourced already on our public repositories. So it's always very good to go to github.com/postman labs to see what repositories we have publicly available, and which of them are stuffs that you actually use within the Postman platform itself.
Great.
Yeah, so let's see how you can generate a code snippet. I'm going to be doing a bit of coding here. I have this code gen folder that I created here, and I have this generate snippets here. Yeah, I just have like some starter files that I have provided. Here I'm just importing something called the Postman SDK. Although I've not introduced the Postman SDK, but when you want to author a collection from scratch, I mean, you saw how painful it was to write the JSON, making mistakes here and there, and having to correct all of those mistakes. So there's something called the Postman Collection SDK. It's an SDK that makes it very easy for us to author a collection. So instead of writing raw JSON, you are just doing something like SDK dot collection and it's creating a new collection for you, or something like SDK dot request. You're providing the name of the request and other information. So it just makes it very seamless and easy to work with creating a collection or working with a collection generally in Scratch programmatically. It makes it very easy and seamless. So the Postman SDK, collection SDK, is also open source. Uh, Let me share a link to that. It can be found at Postman Lab / Postman Collection. Yeah, it's open source. The SDK is open source, and you can see that a lot of people use it. It has been forked 206 times and starred many times. And here it's used by 10.5K people. So it's a pretty popular SDK for anyone who's working with the collection format directly, and it just makes things a lot more easier for you. And these are one of the things that we'll be documenting in this um, documentation here. So I'll be using that. I'm just going to go over this really quickly. So the first thing here is I have this SDK here, and I have this FS file here for importing um, a this file system module here for I want to use it to import a collection JSON file, and I
Right.
have this
That's
code gen. Yeah, I have this code gen library here as well. Yeah, Kevin, you were saying something.
oh no, I was just because it sounded like you were stuck for a moment. It's just built in I believe it's just Node.js where you access the file system.
Yeah, the Node.js file system. So the um, SDK that I'm going to be using is also open source. It's the Postman Code Generator SDK. It allows us to easily generate code snippets for our requests in a collection. So this is open source as well. And you can see that the different languages it supports and the different variants of this language it supports. I'm going to be closing this. I'll just leave it open and I'll come back here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to load a collection. So this SDK, I get a variable called collection here, and I'm just going to do SDK. It's already suggesting it for me, the collection, and I'm going to import a collection here. So I'll just name this imported collection. Then I'll create a new collection here from this collection class here. I'll create a new object instance from it. And I'm going to be using this FS module to import this collection JSON that I have here. So I'll do fs dot read file sync collection the JSON. Sorry, the JSON.
Does this
Then
have
I
to
want to
use
come.
FS or can we just define like collection JSON? Um,
Yes, you can't define collection the JSON directly. That's you have to first load that file into memory,
right.
convert the content of the file into a string, and because it is JSON and we are like passing it as a string, we have to convert it back. We have to pass it back as an object. So I'm going to do JSON.pass here. Just going to close this here. Uh, Let me console.log this, and before I run it, so I'm going to. So I have all of these packages installed already, so I don't need to go over the installation again. So I'm just going to do node codegen snippet. There seems to be cannot find module. Oh, I thought I installed this before the stream. But no worries, I'm just going to npm install this and this. So while this is installing, what I'm really just trying to do here is just to that example that I showed here, where we are generating code snippets for our request. When we're generating code snippets for our request, I want to do the same thing programmatically using the Postman code generator module here. So this is taking a while to install, and
I feel like
I'm just
npm
going
could be
to,
so slow sometimes.
yeah,
It looks like
npm
it's
could be so
complete
slow.
though now, right?
Yeah, it does, but it's supposed to.
Oh,
I'm not
yeah,
sure.
should be on a new line.
Yeah, it should be on a
Um,
new line.
okay, well, while we wait for this,
Yeah.
where's that done? I don't know. We had a question. How to use
Okay.
Postman share collection link via JSON to like an API link. So earlier they were sharing Postman collection links via JSON on Azure DevOps. But due to a
Mm-hmm.
version upgrade in Postman, it's not showing via API link, which uses an access, or it's using an access key now. Do you know how you could do that still? Or is that a question better for the forums?
So is the question, how do you get a collection over a URL in JSON?
Yeah, via JSON link instead of API link, which uses an access key.
Oh, well, I'm not sure I have. I'm not sure that is something that is currently possible.
The
I
camera
think
over
it
here.
does. You do need an API key
Right.
to get a collection currently. I'm not sure there's a way to get a collection without your API key.
Yeah, reach out to us on the forums and I'll post a link to that and we'll help you out. My camera
Yeah,
overheated, but I'm still here.
yeah. The community forums is always a great place to ask questions. So this is done installing, and I'm just going to run this code again, and you can see that it logs this imported collection. And you notice that because this is an SDK, the structure of the collection here is slightly different, but it's still like this exact same thing. So I'm just going to delete this line. The next thing I want to do now is I have to be able to get the request from this collection that I have imported that I want to generate code for. So I could say something like I have to first, because the request is within an item, so I first have to get that request item. So I can say something like requests item would be this collection that I imported. I could do that items to get a list of items, and it has like this IDX function that I could just use to get the item at a specific index. So I'm specifying that I should get the item at the zeroth index since it's an array of items. And from this item, I can get a request, and I can say new request item dot request. Now, to show that this works, I could also console log this.
So this is doing everything that we did in the JSON file, but programmatically with
Yeah,
JavaScript. A little
yeah,
easier
programmatically with
than
JavaScript.
getting lost in brackets and nesting and all that.
Yeah. So now you can see that I'm logging this request. If I want to like get this request in raw JSON, similar to what we have in that JavaScript file, I think I could just do to JSON. Yes, to JSON.
Right.
It has like dots to JSON method that gives me that request in raw JSON. But now, for me to generate a code snippet, let me go back to this documentation here. I'm looking for an example that they provided. So the example that they provided here, they built a single request from scratch, and they're able to specify the language, the variants, and the options. So I'm just going to copy this here and paste it here. Then I'll put all of this in variables. Great. Then I'll put all of this in variables. So here I'm specifying that I want to generate it in Node.js, and I want it to be a request variant. And then I'm just going to copy this code gen here. So I have language specified, variants, I have requests, I have options. So here, if an error occurs, let me log this. I'll log the error. And if it's a snippet, I just want to log that snippet directly. So I'm going to run this. What do we have here? And yeah, I can see that it has generated a code snippet for me, and that code snippet is logged here. And the snippet generated is in Node.js. So I can copy this snippet, or I can use, I have this write code to file module that I wrote
I
that
was
we can
just gonna
import.
say.
Yeah, that we can import. Yeah, so I'm just going to import that. I'll just do const code to file equals to require. Oh, sorry, I was going to type require. I'm just going to call that here. Let's see, code to file. And here it takes in the file name and the data. So I could just name this request snippets and give it snippets. And hit save. Then I'd run this again. And I can see that this request snippet, the JS file, was generated here. And I can find the code request snippets that I generated. So I don't think I have request installed. Let me install this. Then run it. Hopefully this doesn't take forever this time around. It's a very lightweight package. Yeah, that is installed now. And now I can just do node code gen slash request snippets.js and press enter. And if you remember, this is a post request to google.com, right? And because google.com is a website, make a post request to that endpoint. So I'm getting a 404 error, which is the expected response I should be getting. But let's try this with something else. Let's use the Postman Echo service.
Yeah, I don't think we're allowed to do post requests to google.com.
Yeah. So let me use the Postman Echo service that returns JSON. And you can see that I get a JSON response back. It echoes back my request body. And all I just did was, imagine I have this in my workflow, somewhere in my code, if I'm building a tool or something, to generate code snippet or code examples. If I have, let's say I have a custom documentation and I'm generating code samples for that custom documentation in my workflow, just the same way the Postman documenter does. I mean, this was auto-generated and I didn't have to do anything extra. I just ran it and it ran right out of the box without me having to do anything extra. So this is like one of the important things that you can do with this JSON here. It allows you to generate code snippets, and you might just stop at code snippets, but it also allows you to generate complete SDKs for your collection. Yeah, so that's for code snippets. But I also have an example for generating complete SDKs. Here I have the SDK. I think this is a different model for generating SDK. It's different from the one for generating snippets. I thought I npm installed all of this beforehand because I didn't want to do this on the stream.
I assume you
But I
can do
guess,
this in other languages as well, not just JavaScript, right?
yes, not just JavaScript. So let's check a list of languages they support. So let's do Go native.
I'm interested in that one.
Yeah. Go native. So I'm going to save. And let me just run this again. Yes. This. Yes, it generated the code in Go for us. I'm not a Golang developer, so I don't have any environment set up for running Go code. You can see that even my syntax highlighter is not highlighting it properly because I don't have VS Code extensions for that. But yeah, it generated a code in Go, and I'm pretty sure that if I run this code, I think there's an online Golang playground that we could exploit. Yeah, this one. And if I copy this and I paste it here, didn't look up, blah, blah, blah,
Still a
routes.
Google.
Yeah, let me change this to Postman Echo / post. Waiting for remote server. I'm not sure what's wrong. But
Yeah.
ideally, what the behavior that I can't debug this because I don't understand Go. But the behavior that I would expect of this is for it to run right out of the box without me having to do anything else like it did when I ran Node.js. So the one for generating SDK, let me put a link to this repository. You could check it out. Because I've done one code gen, but let me see if I can quickly. How much time do we have left, Kevin?
Um, none really. But if we could quickly go through some of like the remaining stuff, I don't think people would care too much if we're a little over time.
Okay. So I'm not going to go over generating an SDK, but you can generate an SDK, which is really cool. Let me just drag and drop one SDK file that was generated from a collection here. This file here is an SDK, and it was generated from a collection. All of this code, it was generated from this collection here.
Right.
Where's that file? This one. And I can run this file using, let me get a sample code that I have. Let me see. While I was testing, this was the code I used to run. This was the code I used to run that SDK, and it ran right out of the box when I generated it. I didn't have to modify anything else. It just ran and it worked. So that's really cool. It's something that you can give a check as well. I'm going to put a link to the repository in the chat
So that
for this SDK.
that other file was generated
Or if
from.
you,
Oh, go ahead.
oh yeah, I was just saying if you could help me put a link to the SDK in the chat.
Yeah, I can help with that. That other file was
Okay.
generated from um, another extension that, similar to like the generate snippets, you were able to take the JSON file and it created that long this one, right? Like how did this
Yeah,
get generated again?
this file here, right?
Right.
Yeah, right. So this file here uses this generate SDK model. Maybe I can show a quick example of
Sure.
that. Let me just open that repository. Rather than, because of our time, rather than write the code from scratch, I'm just going to be copying
Yeah.
and pasting. It uses this module here, and then let me copy and paste the code for that because of our time. So you can see that this is a lot more simpler to work with. It has like this SDK.generate function, and here I'm only specifying that I want a type of JSON. Like the data I'm generating from is JSON, and this is the data, this collection too, is what I'm generating from. And I want to generate Node.js with a request variant, and when it is generated, if there's an error, I want to console.log that error and return. Or if there is no error, I want to console.log the generated code
Right.
and also write it to a file named collection SDK. So I'm going to do that now. Let me just run this. I can do node code gen generate SDK. Yeah, and you can see that it generated an SDK. And if I click on this newly generated file here, it has generated an SDK for me. Then this code that I used to test, yeah, I'm just importing that SDK, and I'm creating a new instance of that SDK. And it has like this post raw text is a request on this collection. You'd see post raw text. I'm looking for that request. Let me search for it.
Yeah, I was gonna say Control F.
Okay, I found it here. So this is a request in this collection. This post raw text is
Right.
a request in this collection and has a method of post. It's a raw text. It's just post this text and I get that text as the value back. But if I come here and I do node code gen /test, yes. You can see that it's ran that generated code, and this is the exact same response I would get if I had run this in Postman, right? And I'm able to generate an SDK that makes it easier to work with my collection.
Right.
And yeah, so I now have like a method for every request in my collection. And I could even like do for, let's say, folders that are nested. This collection has a folder somewhere.
That
I
looks
think it
incredibly
is.
useful.
Yeah, it is incredibly useful. So if it was a folder, I could do something like this dot folder name, then that's the name of the request, and it just gives me the response back. So this is incredibly useful. You can, like, if you imagine you have a collection with 200 requests or 300 requests, and you just generate an SDK for that entire collection that people can start working with in less than 2 minutes.
That's great.
Yeah. So the last thing that I wanted to show was how you could convert to and from other API specifications. And I'm going to be using converting from, I've done to markdown, but I'm going to be doing converting from OpenAPI to collections, and from collections to the OpenAPI. So we have this repository here. So this repository here is what Postman officially uses. If you come to the API builder here, you can, in Postman, you can alter an API definition, either OpenAPI, Async API, GraphQL, or any other specification. So for example, here, this one here is an OpenAPI definition, and you can convert this to a collection. So this is the model that Postman uses to convert API definitions to collect OpenAPI definitions to collections in Postman. and it is open source, which means you can make use of it as well. But I'm going to be showing how you can do this conversion on the command line. There's a part of this that talks about command line interface. So first, oh God, how did I install this? OpenAPI to Postman v2. I'm just going to paste this. I think I already have this installed. And I'm just going to copy a code snippet from here. This one. Because it's on the command line, I'm just going to copy this. So OpenAPI to Postman 2. Now the spec I want to convert is in this spec.yaml file. And I want it to be collection.gen.js. And I'm just going to leave all of these other properties as they are and click enter. And you can see that I have this collection.gen.js here that has been created, and so it's created from that OpenAPI definition, this one that we have here. Now, this OpenAPI definition is just a demo definition for how you can buy or rent new spacecraft. It has like different parameters for purchasing a spacecraft, for getting a spacecraft, for buying a spacecraft, and all of this. It's just a very small API definition, and I've been able to generate a collection from that. And I can import this collection into Postman. Let me drag and drop. I'm looking for the right screen. Yep, this. So when I come back to collections, I can't find the collection I just imported. Let me do that again. It's importing it as sample API, which is Word. Oh, yeah, this is it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had imported before. Yeah, read a spacecraft. So I can see the different requests. That's just one request for reading a spacecraft, where it has multiple response examples and an unexpected error. And this was generated from an OpenAPI definition, right? I didn't have to like do anything else or anything extra. And similarly, the way you can generate a collection from an OpenAPI definition, you can generate an OpenAPI from a collection JSON. Now, the good thing about collections is that it has like a beautiful community behind it. If you notice, some of the tools that I've used, like the one I used to convert to markdown, was not authored by Postman, it was authored by someone from the community. Similarly, for converting a collection to an open API, the tool I'm going to be using is built by someone from the community. It's actually a colleague, Kevin Corbett. So there's Postman to open API package on GitHub. It's open source. If any of these tools interest you, you can look it up and maybe make contributions. And all of these tools need people to keep them up to date and just continue making contributions to them. So this one converts a Postman collection to an open API. But I'm not going to be doing this over the CLI. He has created a playground for where we could experiment with this. So I could just copy a collection here and generate an open API definition. So what I'm going to do is this auto-generated document collection, I'm going to be using it to auto-generate an open API definition. So I'm going to be pasting it here. And you can see that from this collection here, I can generate an open API definition here. And this open API definition can serve as like an API contract and whatnot. And you could also generate code from open API definitions, right? And it has like its own ecosystem of toolings that are built around it. If you, I'm not an expert when it comes to working with the open API, but I do understand it to some extent.
So we could convert this to different schemas as well, like for working with GraphQL.
Yes, we can convert it to different schemas as well. Like if we're working with GraphQL, for GraphQL, I know I did mention Escape Technologies the other time that they export a collection. When you've run like a security test that you can import into Postman. So the tool that they use to generate that collection and convert like a GraphQL to Postman collection, they open source that tool. It's called Graphman. If you work with GraphQL, um, and you want to convert your GraphQL schema definition language into a Postman collection, this is a great tool to like use to do that conversion. So yeah, we'll be using Graphman. Graphman was built on the Deno runtime. Uh, I am not going to be showing the installation. I already have Graphman installed. So I'm just going to be picking an example from their demo here, and I'm going to be using that. So here, because GraphQL, there's this Rick and Morty API they used, GraphQL API they used. This Rick and Morty GraphQL API. And because GraphQL is like a query language, it means I can run this and query location must have argument of ID. Okay, I'm not going to care about playing around this API, right? What I really just want to do is, since this API supports introspection, which means I can get the schema definition language for this specific API from the API itself, I can copy this code here and just paste it. I already have Graphman installed. And then it's just going to keep asking me if I want to grant access to stuff. I'll just select yes for that. Okay, yeah, it's done. And I can see that it generated a file inside this out folder. And I can see that it generated Rick and Morty Graphman collection, the JSON from that GraphQL API. And then I can import this back into my collection. Let me import. And I was able to convert this into a Postman collection because GraphQL has the queries of concept of queries and mutation, whereby a query is like you're fetching data and mutation is a kind of operation that allows you to mutate data on
Right.
a server where you're creating or updating. So it splits it into queries, mutations. I don't think Graphman supports subscriptions yet, or maybe the Rick and Morty API just doesn't have any subscription yet. Um, it
It's kind of like
splits
get
it.
versus posts.
Yeah, it's kind of like get versus post. So it splits it into two folders, and you can see like the different requests in each of those folders. And you can come to the request body and see uh, what's the query, what the schema for query is. It has the variables, and all of this is. I mean, it literally took less than 10 seconds to generate.
Yeah.
Aside from
Saved a lot of
installation,
time.
yeah, it saved a lot of time. So if I have a GraphQL API and I want to work with collections, I can convert it to collections. So like all of these different tools are things that makes it easier for us and extends like like some of the functionalities that we see within Postman. And if you want to like find a very interesting use case for collections in Postman, and you want to build out a functionality for it, or you want to build an SDK or a library or something, you'd have to understand the collection format one way or the other. And we have like this documentation for learning about the format. But speaking about GraphQL, we have a new GraphQL client in Postman where you can uh, probably we could put a link to a blog post or a video in the chat. But we have like a new GraphQL client in Postman that allows you work easily with GraphQL. So here I could use the Postman Echo service. We have a GraphQL Echo service, and I could select this. Selecting that should prefill the echo service. But I'm just going to copy the rate and multi one and use that since that's not working. And you can see that it's automatically introspecting my schema. And if I want to make a request, I don't have to do a lot. I can just click. This is an ID I'd mentioned. I'd enter to, and I can just click query. Clicking queries and working.
You have to save. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Yeah, now it's working. And you can see that I have like a response back. And I didn't have to do so much, right? All I just did was put the URL here. It has automatically introspected for me, and I'm just clicking through the schema and selecting what it is that I want and what it is that I do not want. Now I could unselect character, collapse this, and let's say I want to get characters by ID 1. I want to get the first character, and it's whatever I'm selecting on the left hand side is automatically being prefilled on the right hand side, and I can just
So you
hit
don't have to
query.
memorize it. It's
Yeah,
like
you don't have
clicking
to
on
memorize it.
the snippets, basically. But
Yeah, and if you have like a large Shiva, you could also search, and you could do every other thing. You could do like authorization, headers. You could import a schema directly. You could write test and per request script. But because it is GraphQL, we call this before query and after response. And you could also like the same way you could modify variables. Here you can provide GraphQL variables if you have them, and you can reference Postman variables within the GraphQL variables. So the new GraphQL client is something you should check out definitely if
it's
you
a
work with
lot
GraphQL
nicer than
APIs.
I remember using it,
Yeah, I mean each time I use it, it always feels nicer than the last time.
right?
So yeah,
Excited.
right. Yeah. So yeah, I think we've been able to cover all of the things we wanted to cover today. But I don't know if you have any new questions or if you have anything you want us to talk about, Kevin.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I'm sure everyone can tell that that's a very in it's a deep topic to kind of cover in an hour and a half. And even then, like we went over, and that's not everything. So if there are like additional questions and stuff like that, you can reach. Oh, my camera is too hot again. You can
Yeah.
reach out to us on like the forums. But let me switch my screen around, and we'll do shout outs. So one
Mhm.
moment.
Okay. Is it me or Kevin? Okay, so while we wait for Kevin to be back, so there's a lot
Oh,
of like, yeah,
I
Kevin is
clicked the
back.
wrong button. Oh my god, sorry. I've been
I
talking
was,
this whole time.
oh
Shoot. All right. Yeah, so what I was saying that no one could hear, basically Postman Intergalactic, as I was saying at the beginning, if you come to this URL, event/intergalactic, we have a webinar coming up next week, so March 22nd, um, on building low code applications with Postman Flows. Postman Flows is like a low code slash no code visual. I wouldn't call it really a scripting language, but a way to kind of do requests and stuff in Postman. So this is like an intro level learning session to kind of figure out how to do all of that stuff. And then April, we have an unboxing session on all of the new features that have come in quarter 1 to Postman. So, I mean, for example, in our last stream, or was it a stream or two ago? Postman v10.10 brought a ton of new stuff. We looked at very briefly today. 10.12 had a bunch of stuff. And then also April 26th, I had mentioned at one point, this is a very good introduction to Postman for developers. So we'll be covering how to send an API request in Postman, how to inspect and test a response, working with variables. This is a great place to jump in if you're kind of looking to fill in some gaps in your knowledge in Postman, or if you're totally new. Also, we have a bunch of other events, like I was mentioning. You can see this stream is here. There's a meetup. So if you're going to GDC, we have an after party. You can meet up with other senior developer advocate from Postman, Ian. We have webinars, future streams, all that stuff. So postman.com/events. This is perfect place to keep up with what's going on in Postman. And then I guess because as I'm the the technical community manager, I have to mention the Supernova program. Supernovas are leaders who are passionate about APIs, testing, and building new things. If you enjoy learning and sharing your knowledge with other developers, then please apply to be a Postman Supernova. You could do so at this link. You'll get to work with me. It's pretty fun. Yeah, I think that's a bit about it for my shoutouts. Do you have anything you'd like to share, Deva?
Well, I'd say shout out to like everyone who made it to the end of the stream.
Yeah, let's see if my camera's cooled down. It's only happened once before. Not turning on. Where can people find you, Devo? Do you want to share like your Twitter?
Yeah, so my name has my Twitter handle at Gbadebo. That might be a mouthful to pronounce. It's a really weird username, but I've been using it as far back as I can't remember, so I'm not going to change it. But yeah, you can. It's just a word spelling of my actual name. So you can find me at my Twitter handle that is on my display name. I'm also Gbadebo Bello on LinkedIn, so we can connect on LinkedIn. You could follow me on Twitter. You could say hi. If there's any interesting thing you learned from the stream, please tweet about it and tag Hi and Kevin. I think Kevin is Devrel Kev on Twitter, so you could tag us. And yeah, let us know what you think and what you've learned from watching us just figure this out together.
Yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and thanks so much for demoing all of this, Debo. Someone asked, where's the Supernova link? I am so glad you asked. Let me share that right now.
Yeah.
Right there. Cool. All right, thanks everyone. Have a
thanks for
great...
hosting us, Kevin.
Yes. A little bit of technical difficulties and sneezing, but we made it.
Yeah,
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.